Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, May 6th, 2020, and today RealClearPolitics dropped their 2020, race for the Senate map, and they pretty much put out all of their ratings for all of the Senate races as of right now, May 2020. So they give the Republicans 49 seats, which means that if Donald Trump is to be reelected, the GOP realistically only needs to win one out of the 5, or actually 6, toss-up seats. There are 45 Democratic seats, and there are 40 safe Republican seats compared to 39 safe Democratic seats. So the rest of the seats are somewhat competitive, but if you take a look at the margins, that's what's making it a likely characterization rather than a safe state for some of these. For example, Virginia, New Jersey, and Oregon, which we already know are pretty solidly for the Democratic Party. Same goes for the Republicans in the states of Mississippi, Tennessee. These are two states that we know are going to be pretty solid for the GOP as well. So looking at this map, RCP, RealClearPolitics, tries to be very generous to both parties. They really leave a lot of open room in their characterizations for a number of these races, mainly because they don't want to be wrong. And if you take a look at the map, realistically, some of these calls just don't make sense. If you look at the special election, the main mistake that I caught was that they messed up the characterization. They characterized the special election, which they refer to as GA2, as likely, but they mean to keep it in the lean characterization as denoted in this. But if you just look, they flipped the colorization, so it does throw you off. If you do click on it, it will take you to, let me see if it just takes you to the regular Georgia Senate race. So I'm trying to see if you just click over here. Yeah, so this one will take you to the Senate special election, in which the colors just need to be flipped, so the map just looks a little bit off, but I do agree with their characterizations of those races. But they do have the states like Tennessee and Tennessee in the likely column, even though it's going to be pretty solid. It was only a little bit close in 2018 because a former popular governor ran for Senate, ended up losing, but it was not exactly the largest margin that the GOP won by. As for the remaining states, Alabama, I don't necessarily agree that this one's going to be a likely Republican state. I understand it's being held during a presidential election, but there's a lot happening within the GOP primary right now. That's going to end up making it very difficult for either of these two nominees to come apart with a solidified Republican Party. And yeah, you can win with a broken Republican Party in the state of Alabama. It is a solid Republican state, so any type of Republican support or any resemblance of it will win you an election. But in 2017, Doug Jones won this Senate race, and he is voting with the favor of his constituents, and a lot of the time. He has a mildly good approval rating amongst Alabama citizens, and I don't necessarily think that the margin is going to be likely. Regardless if it's Jeff Sessions or Tommy Tuberville, this Republican primary is probably going to lose, both of them, some voters to Doug Jones. Now, if you look at the likely Democratic column, I already covered that. Moving on to the lean Democratic column, a lot of these I would actually say should be moving over into the likely Democratic column. New Mexico, New Hampshire, and Minnesota, all of which I do consider likely on my own characterization. Now, they're probably just playing it safe because these states are typically close in a presidential election, but are not likely to do so in the presidential election in 2020, nor were they pretty close in the 2018 midterm elections, whether it's a statewide race or both of Minnesota's Senate races or a governor's race in New Mexico. It really all shows that the Democrats are going to have a pretty solid victory here. And if you just take a look at a lot of the polling data done in some of these states, well, I don't think there's any done in Minnesota, but Tina Smith won by 10.6% back in 2018 in this race, okay? If you look at New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen only won by 3.2%, but she's going in with a very large advantage. And in the New Mexico Senate race, there's a Republican versus a Democrat up there because the incumbent is retiring, but it's still New Mexico. It's still pretty solid for the Democratic Party. So in fact, I'd actually characterize all these lean Democratic states and move them over into the likely column. As for this toss-up column, I do agree with most of it. I agree with Arizona. I agree with Maine. I agree with Montana and North Carolina. For the states of Michigan and Colorado, I would consider those both lean for the Democratic Party. Colorado more so towards the likely column, but both of them I do expect to still end up going for the Democratic Party and really should not be considered a toss-up realistically. Both of those states are going to be pretty solid margins for the Democrats. The only way it narrows up if Donald Trump comes close in those states, but obviously he's going to get close in the state of Michigan, but he would need to be within a winnable margin, and as of right now I don't see that happening, so I do consider both Michigan and Colorado to be lean Democratic states. Yes, Colorado is a flip, and that would effectively give the Democrats on this map 47. And the Republicans 49. If we look at the remaining lean GOP states, I do agree with most of these. I would say Texas is more so likely. If you look at the data, the only poll showing it shows that it's going to be close. That's honestly just because of the fact that the state itself has narrowed up in recent election history, but 8 to 12-point margin is still considered likely. I would consider the state of Texas a likely GOP state. But for the Senate special election, I agree with the lean characterization. I agree with Iowa's characterization. Joni Ernst is probably a race that the Republican Party should be focusing on a lot more. And Kansas, they have addressed Kansas, whereas a number of other political firms have not, mainly because it's Kansas. But if Chris Kobach is that nominee, it's going to be really hard for them to win, for them being the Republicans in the state of Kansas, even though it is Kansas. For the likely GOP state, again, I never agreed with that Alabama characterization. I do agree with the Georgia at-large characterization. As for Mitch McConnell, a lot of people may not agree that he's going to absolutely have a very large margin in the Senate race. I am somewhere in the middle between that. I don't think Amy McGrath really has a chance, but I also think that the margin will just be narrow because of how unpopular he is, and maybe some crossover support for Amy McGrath. But realistically, Mitch McConnell's the Senate Majority Leader. He's not going anywhere. Just because he's disapproved of doesn't mean anything. In 2014, he was disapproved of by a worse margin, and if you look at the margin from 2014, it was 15.5. The last time there was a Democratic wave year, a huge Democratic wave year, Mitch McConnell won by 6%, almost reflecting the RCP average. Now, the reason why that is interesting is because Obama nearly had 60 Senate seats leading after that election. I believe the final numbers were either 59-41 or 58-42, but we will likely not see a majority that large for either political party for a pretty long time, considering how contested a lot of these races are coming to be. And for Mississippi, Cindy Hyde-Smith had a 2018 Senate special election. She won by 7.8%. It wasn't exactly the best number to win by. It is the state of Mississippi. It should not have been this close, but Mike Espy somehow did well against Cindy Hyde-Smith, and it looks like he's the Democratic nominee yet again. So it's just a rerun. Obviously, Mike Espy doesn't realistically have a shot at the state of Mississippi, but given its old election history that showed it close just 2 years prior with the same candidates, I honestly don't think much is going to change in the overall percentage. But obviously, if you look at the presidential election, Clinton lost by 18.5% in Mississippi. But like I said, if you're wondering why I consider the state of Mississippi to be likely on my presidential electoral maps, in 2012 it went to Romney by 11.5%, and in 2008 McCain 13.2%. That was just because Barack Obama did very well with African American turnout, and Joe Biden is going to do very well with African American turnout as well. So let me go back here so we can go ahead and take a look at that Senate map. But the toss-up states, Montana, realistically, there isn't too much data out there. Daines did have a very solid victory last time he ran against Amanda Curtis. I actually think she ran for the MT at-large race in the House, but I'm not so sure. Amanda Curtis, her name just sounds very familiar. I know she ran for something, at least. For the state of North Carolina, there is some data here. Cunningham leads by 0.3%. There's only about 3 polls, I think, 3 current polls. If we go over to the other state, let's see. Oh, maybe because they don't include an NBC poll. For the state of Maine, this one is going to be very closely looked at. Susan Collins, she, again, like I said, never really had a competitive race, 37% with her last campaign. So realistically, she should be doing very well, but it looks like the Democrats going to take it away. In Arizona, there's a lot of polls here. Kelly leads in almost every one of them. In the beginning, McSally led. That's likely just because Kelly didn't have his name as far out as he does now, but numbers are starting to inch up to a point where they either tie at 50, or one candidate gets 50, or one candidate gets an overall majority. If you look in 2018, Martha McSally led by 1% on Election Day, ended up losing by 2.3%. It wasn't exactly a small margin compared to what the polling data suggested. So, yes, it was a large margin for Kirsten Sinema for a pretty substantial period of time, but the Republican Party was not able to take away with it in 2018. So this is pretty much their battle for the Senate map. I don't expect it to change much, even though a lot of these ratings don't necessarily make sense, or they're too lenient towards either the Democrats or the GOP. Realistically, they're probably not going to change it. RealClearPolitics loves playing safe in terms of their presidential map, their Senate map, and I'll also be covering their House map tomorrow. They released their ratings for the 2020 House. I don't think they have a governor's map, and I don't think they'll make one just because of how few governor's races are on the ballot in 2020. But it's always interesting just seeing another type of view, especially from a very respected source such as RealClearPolitics, one that I've been using since this creation of my channel. But again, based off this map, the Republicans would only need 1 if Trump is reelected, whereas the Democrats would need 6 in that scenario. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.